The first sign was the silence. Not the comfortable silence of a quiet evening, but a thick, unnatural hush that seemed to swallow the usual city hum. I lived in an old brownstone, the kind where floorboards creaked tales of past residents and the walls, paper-thin, offered unwilling intimacy with your neighbors. My neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, lived in 2B directly across the hall. I barely knew him. A wisp of a man, always in beige, always carrying a worn leather briefcase, always with eyes that seemed to look past you, into some unseen distance. We'd nod in the hallway, a polite ghost greeting, and that was the extent of our interaction. Yet he was a fixture. A beige-clad punctuation mark in the daily sentence of our building. Then the beige disappeared. It started subtly. I hadn't seen him leave for work in the morning, hadn't heard his familiar cough echoing from across the hall. Days bled into a week and the beige void persisted. The rhythmic click of his apartment door locking and unlocking, a sound I'd unconsciously registered, vanished. His mail, usually cleared daily, began to mound in the hallway slot, a silent, papery scream. Rumors, as they always do in close quarters, began to bloom. Mrs. Henderson from 3A, a woman whose gossip was as potent as her perfume, whispered about a sudden trip, a sick relative, even a secret rendezvous with a younger woman. Each theory, flimsy as it was, felt somehow inadequate to explain the abruptness. There was no suitcase wheeled out, no goodbye wave, just nothing. An absence so complete it felt like he'd been plucked from existence. The building superintendent, a gruff man named Tony, shrugged off concerns. Probably went to visit his daughter in Florida, he'd grumbled, though I'd never heard Mr. Abernathy mention a daughter, or Florida, or anything personal at all. Tony, however, was the master of dismissal. For him, a problem solved was one ignored. But the silence was insidious. It wormed its way into my thoughts, amplified by the growing pile of unopened mail. A strange disquiet settled over the building, a shared, unspoken question mark hanging in the air. We were all missing something small, beige and habitually present, and its absence was creating a ripple of unease. One evening, about 10 days after I'd first noticed the void, I was making dinner, the rhythmic chop of my knife the only sound in my kitchen. Suddenly, a faint noise drifted from the wall separating my apartment from 2B. A low, muffled sigh. I paused, knife hovering mid-air. Apartment walls are thin, yes, but this was odd. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall. I pressed my ear against the cool plaster. Silence. Had I imagined it? Stress. I'd been working long hours, the city was always a pressure cooker. I dismissed it, chalking it up to overactive imagination and resumed chopping. Then it came again, clearer this time. A soft, raspy whisper, undeniably human. It wasn't a shout, not even a raised voice, more like a breathy exhale of words. I strained to hear, my heart quickening its pace. Help. The word was barely audible, swallowed by the wall, yet it hit me with the force of a physical blow. Help. From Mr. Abernathy's apartment? But he was gone. Wasn't he? I leaned back from the wall, my skin prickling with goosebumps. It must be the building settling, pipes groaning, something mundane. Old buildings made strange noises. But the whisper, that chillingly human help, lingered in the air, a phantom echo in the sudden quiet of my kitchen. I walked out into the hallway, my steps hesitant, almost apologetic. The door to 2B stared back, blank and impassive. The mail overflowed from the slot like a paper waterfall. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Should I knock? What would I say? Excuse me, Mr. Abernathy, are you whispering from inside your walls? Absurd. Utterly absurd. Yet, the whisper, it had sounded desperate. I walked back to my apartment, locking my own door with a click that felt too loud in the unsettling quiet. I tried to rationalize it. Drafts playing tricks with ventilation, someone whispering in the street outside, sound traveling strangely through the old building's bones. Anything but the impossible. But as I lay in bed that night, the city's usual lullaby replaced by an oppressive silence, I heard it again. Fainter this time, a thread of sound weaving its way through the stillness. A whisper rising and falling like a shallow breath. It was indistinct, unintelligible, but undeniably there. And it sounded like it was coming from the wall. From 2B. From the empty apartment of the vanished Mr. Abernathy. Days turned into weeks. The whispers continued, erratic, unpredictable. Sometimes they were faint, almost subliminal, like the rustle of dry leaves in a distant wind. Other times they were clearer, more insistent. Please, someone, hear me? I tried to ignore them. To bury myself in work, in books, in the noisy distractions of the city outside. But the silence inside the building, especially at night, was a vacuum, and the whispers filled that vacuum with a chilling resonance. I started sleeping with the radio on, a low hum of talk radio or classical music attempting to drown out the unsettling sounds from the wall. It worked somewhat during the day. But at night, when the city slept and the building settled into its creaking slumber, the whispers would seep through, like water seeping through cracks in a dam. One afternoon I was on a phone call with my sister discussing mundane family matters when I heard it. Not from the wall this time, but inside my apartment. A faint, breathy whisper almost directly in my ear, despite the phone pressed against the other. "Sarah." My sister's voice on the other end of the line faltered. "Sarah? Did you hear that?" I froze, phone clutched tight. "Hear what?" I asked, my voice tight, trying to sound nonchalant. "That whisper. Just now. Sounded like someone calling your name." My blood ran cold. My sister, miles away, had heard it too? Or was she imagining it, mirroring my own growing paranoia? "No, must have been static on the line," I stammered, trying to dismiss it even to myself. "Static doesn't whisper names, Sarah," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "Are you okay? You sound tense." I cut the call short, feigning a bad connection. My hand trembled as I hung up the phone. It wasn't static. It was the voice. My neighbor's voice. But how? And why? The whispers started appearing in other unexpected places. One morning as I was getting ready for work, I turned on the radio in the bathroom. Classical music filled the small space, then a sudden crackle of static, and beneath the music, impossibly faint, the whisper. "Don't leave me." I slammed the radio off, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was everywhere. In the walls, in my phone, in the radio. Was I losing my mind? Was stress finally cracking my sanity? I started avoiding my apartment, spending evenings at cafes, libraries, anywhere noisy and public. But even there, in the bustling anonymity of the city, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being listened to. The whispers had become a constant undercurrent to my life, a relentless, unsettling hum of dread. One night, exhaustion finally pulled me back to my apartment. I was too tired to fight it, too weary to seek refuge elsewhere. I collapsed into bed, fully clothed, hoping to fall asleep before the whispers started. I drifted off into a fitful, uneasy slumber. Then I was in a dream. I was walking down a long, dark hallway lined with doors. Each door was slightly ajar, emitting a sliver of dim light. And from behind each door, the whispers. "Help. Sarah, please, hear me." The voices were layered, overlapping, creating a cacophony of desperate pleas. I felt a cold dread seep into my dream self, a primal fear that paralyzed me. I wanted to run, to escape the hallway, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, closer. Suddenly, one of the doors swung open. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Abernathy. But not the beige wisp of a man I vaguely remembered. This Mr. Abernathy was gaunt, his skin stretched tight over his bones, his eyes hollow, black pits in his skull. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, the whispers emanated from him, from his very being. He reached out a skeletal hand, his fingers long and skeletal. "You hear me?" he mouthed, his eyes burning into mine. I woke up with a gasp, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my chest. The room was dark, silent, or so it seemed. Then, faintly from the wall, the whisper. "Sarah." It was no longer just a whisper. It was my name. Specifically, deliberately, chillingly spoken. It knew me. The voice knew me. Part 3, The Abandoned Apartment. The dream or nightmare was the final straw. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly haunted by disembodied whispers, questioning my own sanity. I had to find out what was going on, what was happening in 2B. The superintendent, Tony, remained stubbornly unhelpful. "Look, lady, the guy's gone. He'll turn up. Or he won't. Not my problem." But the mail, the whispers, I tried to explain, to make him understand the unsettling reality. He just waved a dismissive hand. "Old building, lady. Noises. Imagination. Leave it be." Leave it be? With whispers calling my name from the walls? Impossible. I decided to take matters into my own hands. The building was old, security lax. Tony was lazy and indifferent. Getting into 2B wouldn't be impossible. The next day, while Tony was supposedly inspecting the boiler in the basement, more likely taking a nap, I slipped into the hallway, armed with a hairpin and a nervous determination. I'd watched enough movies to have a basic understanding of lockpicking. The lock on 2B was old, stiff, but surprisingly yielding. After a few tense minutes of fumbling, A faint click echoed in the quiet hallway. The door swung inward, revealing the interior of Mr. Abernathy's apartment. The air inside was thick, stale, and heavy with dust. It smelled of disuse and something else, something faintly metallic, almost coppery. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, mirroring the beige monotony of its former occupant. A worn armchair, a small, dusty table, a narrow bed covered with a drab, gray blanket. Everything was meticulously neat, yet coated in a layer of neglect. Sunlight filtered weakly through the grimy window, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The silence here was even more profound than in the hallway, a suffocating blanket of stillness. It was like stepping into a tomb. I moved cautiously, my senses on high alert. The whispers were absent here, strangely silent within the apartment itself. But the feeling of unease was amplified, a palpable sense of wrongness clinging to the air. I started to explore, methodically searching for anything that might explain Mr. Abernathy's disappearance, the whispers, the pervasive sense of dread. The drawers of a small dresser were empty, save for a few stray buttons and a faded photograph of a young woman, presumably the daughter Tony had mentioned. There was nothing remarkable, nothing out of place. The kitchen was equally barren, a few dusty dishes in the sink, a half-empty box of tea bags. Even the refrigerator was empty, humming with a lonely, mechanical drone. Then, in the living room, I noticed something. Beneath the armchair, partially hidden by the worn fabric, was a small wooden box. It was plain, unadorned, almost deliberately inconspicuous. My heart quickened its pace as I knelt down and pulled it out. It was surprisingly heavy. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were objects that sent a shiver of cold dread down my spine. A collection of small, intricately carved wooden figures. They were humanoid but grotesquely distorted, their limbs too long, their faces twisted into silent screams. They were unsettling, deeply disturbing, radiating a palpable sense of wrongness. Mixed amongst the figures were other items. Small, dried herbs tied together with twine. A tarnished silver locket, its surface scratched and blackened. And, most disturbingly, several small bone-like objects. Too small to be human bones but undeniably bone-like. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't just a simple disappearance. This was something darker. Something ritualistic. The wooden figures, the herbs, the bones, it all hinted at something sinister, something unnatural. As I stared at the contents of the box, a faint scratching sound echoed from the corner of the room. I jumped, my pulse leaping into overdrive. The sound came again, a rhythmic scraping like nails on wood. I slowly turned, my eyes scanning the room, my senses screaming danger. The sound was coming from behind the armchair, from the wall separating 2B from my apartment. And then I heard it again. Not a whisper this time, but a voice. Clearer, louder than ever before, no longer muffled by the wall. It was Mr. Abernathy's voice, but distorted, deeper, resonating with an unnatural hollowness. She sees. The voice was coming from inside the wall. Inside the wall, behind the armchair, where the scratching sound originated. Panic clawed at my throat. She sees? Who was she? And what was behind the wall? My eyes darted to the wall. It looked ordinary, just plaster and paint. But the voice, the scratching, something was inside there. Something alive. Or undead. Terror propelled me to my feet. I slammed the wooden box shut, shoved it back under the armchair, and scrambled back towards the door, my mind racing, my heart pounding like a war drum. I had stumbled into something far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. Mr. Abernathy hadn't just disappeared. He'd vanished into something in the walls. And the voice wasn't a ghost. It was something else entirely. Something trapped. And it was calling my name. Part 4, The Walls Breathe. Back in my apartment, the silence was shattered, replaced by a roaring in my ears. I bolted the door, barricaded myself inside, my mind reeling from the horrors of 2B. The box, the figures, the bones, the voice from the wall, it was all swirling together into a vortex of terror. The whispers started again, almost immediately, louder now, more insistent. She knows, the box. It was as if the voice, or whatever it was aware of what I'd seen, of what I'd discovered. The whispers weren't random pleas for help anymore. They were focused, directed, menacing. I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. But rationality felt like a distant shore, receding further with each chilling whisper. Was I losing my mind? Was this all some elaborate hallucination, a psychotic break triggered by stress and loneliness? Or was something truly supernatural at play? The clues in 2B, The unsettling objects in the box, they pointed to something far beyond the realm of ordinary reality. The wooden figures, grotesque and unnatural, seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The herbs and bones, ritualistic, almost demonic. But how could any of that explain the voice? The voice calling my name, whispering from inside the walls? Days blurred into a nightmare. I barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building, every rustle from the walls. The whispers became more frequent, more intrusive. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were sentences, fragments of conversations, garbled pronouncements. She is listening. The veil is thin. He is waiting. The voice spoke of she, the veil, he. Who were they? What did it all mean? Then one night the whispers took a terrifying turn. I was lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling when I heard it. Not a whisper this time, but a clear, distinct voice, speaking directly to me as if someone was standing right beside my bed. Sarah. It was Mr. Abernathy's voice, but colder, deeper, infused with an unnatural resonance. It wasn't coming from the wall anymore. It was coming from within the room. I sat bolt upright, my heart seizing in my chest. The room was dark, silent except for the frantic thumping of my own pulse. But the voice, it had been real. Undeniably real. Sarah, we are connected now. Connected? Connected to what? To whom? To the voice in the walls, the horrors in 2B, the vanished Mr. Abernathy? The air in the room grew cold, a sudden unnatural chill that raised goosebumps on my skin. I could feel it now, a presence in the room, something unseen, something malevolent. The whispers started again, swirling around me, enveloping me. But now they were accompanied by another sound. A faint, rhythmic breathing. A slow, deep, raspy inhalation and exhalation coming from the wall. The wall separating my apartment from 2B. The walls weren't just whispering. They were breathing. The building itself seemed to be alive, or rather, something was alive within it. Something that breathed, something that whispered, something that knew my name. The breathing grew louder, closer, the whispers intensifying, weaving themselves into a terrifying symphony of dread. The wall seemed to pulse, to vibrate subtly. I pressed my hand against it and felt it. A faint tremor, a rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat. Or something far more sinister. The voice spoke again, closer now, right beside my ear, as if a phantom mouth was whispering directly into my ear canal. He is waiting for you, Sarah. Behind the wall? Behind the wall? Was Mr. Abernathy still alive? Trapped inside the walls? Or was it something else, something masquerading as him, using his voice, his name, to lure me closer? A horrifying possibility dawned on me. What if the whispers weren't just sounds? What if they were lures? What if the voice was trying to draw me in, to trap me like Mr. Abernathy? What if the walls weren't just breathing but hungry? Fear, raw and primal, flooded my senses. I had to get out. Now, before it was too late. Before whatever was in the walls, whatever was breathing, whispering, waiting, reached out and claimed me too. I scrambled out of bed, my legs trembling, my breath ragged. I grabbed my keys, my phone, anything I could find, and stumbled towards the door, my eyes fixed on the wall, on the breathing, whispering wall. As I reached for the doorknob, the voice spoke one last time, clear, cold, and chillingly triumphant. Don't leave, Sarah. We're just getting started. And then the breathing stopped. The whispers ceased. The wall was silent. But the silence was far more terrifying than the whispers had ever been. Because now, I knew I was no longer just listening to the voice. The voice was listening to me. Part 5. The Twist of Flesh and Bone. I fled my apartment, bursting out into the hallway, gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway was empty, eerily quiet. But the silence felt different now, pregnant with anticipation, like the hush before a storm. I stumbled down the stairs, ignoring the curious glances of Mrs. Henderson, who was peeking out from her doorway. I needed to get out of the building to escape the suffocating presence of the whispers, the breathing walls, the chilling voice. Outside, the night air was cool, crisp, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I walked, almost ran, down the street, not knowing where I was going, just needing to put distance between myself and the brownstone, between myself and the voice. I ended up at a 24-hour diner, a brightly lit oasis in the darkness. I slid into a booth, ordered coffee, and tried to calm my racing thoughts, my frantic pulse. But the whispers followed me, or at least, the memory of them, the lingering chill of their presence. Was I truly losing my mind? Had stress and fear conjured up this elaborate hallucination? Or was something real, something terrifyingly real, happening in my apartment, in the walls of that old building? I replayed everything in my mind. The disappearance of Mr. Abernathy, the whispers starting from the wall separating our apartments, the voice calling my name, the exploration of 2B, the horrifying contents of the wooden box, the breathing walls, the final, chilling pronouncement. It all pointed to something supernatural, something malevolent. But my rational mind still fought against it, clinging to the possibility of a logical explanation, however improbable. Then a thought struck me, a horrifyingly simple, yet utterly chilling thought. What if the whispers weren't coming from the wall? What if they were coming through the wall? What if the wall itself wasn't just plaster and brick? What if it was something else, something organic? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Organic? Like flesh? Bone? Could the building itself be alive? Or infested by something that was slowly, subtly transforming it? The metallic smell in 2B, the bone-like objects in the box. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The metallic smell wasn't just dust and decay. It was the smell of blood, of decay, of something biological. The bones weren't just random objects. They were fragments. Fragments of something consumed, something absorbed. And Mr. Abernathy, he hadn't just disappeared. He'd been integrated. Into the walls. Into the building itself. The whispers weren't just his voice. They were the residual echoes of his consciousness, trapped, fragmented, still clinging to existence within the thing that had consumed him. And it was hungry. It was growing. It was evolving. And it had noticed me. It had heard me. It was calling my name because it saw me as next. The diner suddenly felt cold, hostile, despite the bright lights and the murmur of conversation. I was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare reality that no one else could perceive. I had to do something. I couldn't just run. I couldn't just hide. I had to confront it, to understand it, to find some way to stop it. Or I would become the next Mr. Abernathy, another whisper trapped within the breathing, hungry walls. But how? How do you fight something that lives in the walls? Something that speaks in whispers, breathes in silence, and hungers for human flesh? The answer, I realized with a chilling certainty, lay in 2B. In Mr. Abernathy's apartment, in the box, in the secrets hidden within those dust-laden rooms. I had to go back. I had to face the horror again if I wanted any chance of survival. But as I thought about returning to the brownstone, a new whisper reached me, not from the walls this time, but from my own phone. A notification, a text message. Unfamiliar number. Just one word. Welcome. My blood ran cold. Welcome. Welcome to what? Welcome to the nightmare? Welcome to becoming part of the walls? I opened the text, my hand trembling. Below the single word, welcome, was another message, longer, more chilling. We've been expecting you, Sarah. He's been preparing your room. It's just across the hall. Don't worry, you'll fit right in. We always do. The message was signed simply, the building. My phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the diner table. The building? It was as if the building itself was communicating, was aware, was sentient. And then I understood. It wasn't just in the walls. It was the walls. The floors, the ceilings, the very structure of the brownstone. It wasn't just infested. It was alive. In a way that defied all natural laws, all rational understanding. And it was hungry. And it was waiting. And I was its prey. Mr. Abernathy wasn't just trapped in the walls. He had become part of them. And now it wanted me to join him. The horrifying twist wasn't just the supernatural presence. It was the realization that the supernatural presence was the building. The building itself was the monster. The walls weren't just walls. They were flesh and bone disguised as plaster and brick. And they were breathing. And they were hungry. And they were calling my name. The text message, the chilling welcome, was a gauntlet thrown down, a final, terrifying confirmation. There was no running, no hiding. The horror wasn't just in my apartment in 2B, it was everywhere within the building. The brownstone itself was the trap, and I was firmly caught within its jaws. But fear, raw and paralyzing as it was, began to give way to a desperate, reckless resolve. If I was going to die, I wasn't going to die whimpering in a corner. I was going to fight. I was going to understand what this building entity was, what it wanted, and if there was even the faintest chance, I was going to try to destroy it. Armed with a newfound, almost suicidal courage, I left the diner and walked back towards the brownstone. The city streets seemed eerily silent now, devoid of traffic, of people. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. As I approached the building, I noticed something different. The brownstone seemed darker somehow. The windows were black holes, devoid of light. The bricks themselves seemed to have shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the building was flexing muscles, preparing itself. I entered the building, the front door swinging inward with an unnatural ease as if inviting me in. The hallway was plunged into absolute darkness, the usual dim hallway light inexplicably extinguished. The silence here was suffocating, pressing down on me like a physical weight. But it wasn't completely silent. I could hear it now, the breathing, more pronounced, more rhythmic, filling the hallway with its slow, fleshy cadence. And beneath the breathing, the faintest of whispers, swirling around me, disembodied fragments of voices, echoes of past victims. "Sarah, come closer. We're waiting. Join us." I ignored the whispers, my heart pounding, my senses on high alert. I had to get back to 2B, to the box, to find some clue, some weapon, anything that could help me against this thing. I crept down the hallway, feeling my way along the wall, the plaster cold and clammy beneath my fingers. It felt strangely yielding, almost soft. Not like plaster at all. More like skin. I reached the door to 2B, fumbled for the hairpin in my pocket, and quickly picked the lock again. The door swung open, revealing the interior in near darkness. But even in the gloom I could sense the change. The apartment felt different, more alive. The air was thick with that metallic, coppery smell, stronger now, almost overpowering. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering in from the street outside. The furniture in the room seemed to have shifted slightly, the armchair moved closer to the wall, the table tilted at an unnatural angle. It was as if the room itself was rearranging itself, adapting to something new. The wooden box was still under the armchair, exactly as I'd left it. I knelt down, pulled it out, and opened it, the grotesque wooden figures staring up at me in the gloom, their silent screams amplified by the oppressive atmosphere. I examined the contents of the box again, searching for anything I might have missed, any clue that could help me understand the nature of this building monster. The herbs, the bones, the locket, they seemed to be components of some ritual, some dark magic. But what kind of ritual? And to what purpose? Then my fingers brushed against something new, something I hadn't noticed before, tucked deep within the velvet lining of the box. A small rolled-up piece of parchment, tied with a thin strand of black hair. My heart leaped. This was it. This had to be it. A message, a ritual, instructions, something that could explain everything or at least offer a glimmer of hope. With trembling hands, I untied the hair and unrolled the parchment. It was old, brittle, covered in faded ink, written in a spidery, almost illegible script. It was a ritual, a dark, ancient ritual, detailing how to bind something. Something powerful. Something hungry. The ritual described using specific herbs, bones, and wooden figures to create a vessel. A vessel to contain something ancient, something primordial, something that craved human life force. And the vessel, the parchment revealed with chilling clarity, was not an object but a place. A building. The brownstone wasn't just a building. It was a prison, a vessel, created generations ago to contain something unspeakable. And Mr. Abernathy, he wasn't a victim. He was a caretaker. One of a long line of caretakers, tasked with maintaining the ritual, with feeding the entity within the building, with ensuring its continued containment. But something had gone wrong. The ritual had weakened. The entity was stirring. And Mr. Abernathy, he had failed. He had become consumed, absorbed, his consciousness fragmented and trapped within the very walls he was supposed to guard. And now the entity was awake. It was hungry. It was calling for me. It wanted a new caretaker. Or perhaps something more. Perhaps it was tired of being contained. Perhaps it was ready to break free. As I read the final lines of the ritual, a bone-chilling realization washed over me. The ritual wasn't just for containment. It was for transformation. For turning a building into a living vessel, capable of consuming and absorbing human life force. And the process, it wasn't just about trapping an entity. It was about becoming it. The building wasn't just containing something evil. It was evil. It was alive in a twisted, monstrous way. And it was growing stronger with each victim it consumed. Suddenly, the breathing in the hallway intensified, closer now, filling the apartment with its fleshy cadence. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, no longer just pleas but menacing pronouncements. She understands. The vessel is complete. It is time. The walls began to vibrate, more intensely now, the tremors spreading through the floor, the ceiling. The air grew heavy, oppressive, charged with an unnatural energy. The metallic smell intensified, almost choking me, filling my lungs with the stench of blood and decay. I looked around the room, my eyes darting frantically, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. But there was nothing. Just dust, shadows, and the terrifying realization that I was trapped, cornered, about to become the next victim of the breathing, hungry building. Then I noticed something else in the room. In the corner, behind the dresser, partially hidden by the shadows, a faint glow. A soft, pulsing, otherworldly light emanating from the wall. The wall separating 2B from my apartment. The wall where the whispers had started. The wall where the breathing was coming from. The heart of the building. The parchment in my hand fluttered, falling to the floor. My eyes were fixed on the glowing wall, drawn to it as if by an invisible force. It wasn't just glowing anymore. It was pulsating. Like a beating heart. A monstrous, fleshy heart, hidden within the walls of the brownstone. And it was calling to me. Not with whispers anymore, but with a silent, irresistible pull, a gravitational force that threatened to draw me into its pulsing depths. I knew with a chilling certainty that the heart of the building was the source of the horror, the center of the entity, the place where Mr. Abernathy had been absorbed, the place where I was destined to meet my fate. But in that moment of utter terror, a spark of defiance ignited within me. If I was going to die, I wasn't going to die passively. I wasn't going to be absorbed into the walls without a fight. I was going to confront the heart of the building, to look into the abyss and maybe, just maybe, find a way to strike back. Whether it was a suicidal act of desperation, or a last flicker of hope, I didn't know. But I knew I had to go to the wall. To the pulsing, glowing heart of the building. To face the terrifying reality that awaited me there. To confront the voice that wouldn't stop. And to discover the shocking truth behind my neighbor's disappearance. Even if it meant becoming the next whisper in the walls. To be continued.